Good evening and welcome. I'm NET News Director Dennis Kellogg, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's debate between Nebraska U.S. Senate candidates, Republican incumbent Senator Ben Sasse and Democrat Chris Janicek. Follow tonight's debate and all of our 2020 election coverage on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at NET News Nebraska and at the hashtag NESEN. And we welcome those watching nationwide on C-SPAN tonight. For the next hour, the candidates will face questions from Nebraska journalists. The rules are fairly simple. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond to the question with 30-second rebuttals if needed. We'll begin with questions on domestic policy, and then we'll transition to foreign policy. Before the debate, we held several coin tosses with the campaigns to determine the order of different parts of the debate. And as a result, the first candidate to present a 3-minute opening statement is Mr. Janicek.
Ready to go? I'm going to start off with a personal story, and it's very personal to me, and that's the reason I'm in this race. My father died of a heart attack when he was 54 years old. His father, my grandfather, died of a heart attack when he was 58 years old. My great-grandfather dropped dead at age 60. When I turned 50, guess what? I had a massive heart attack. I had been to the doctor just a week before because I was afraid that this might be happening, and it did. I was rushed to the hospital, basically dead on arrival. But the doctors at the Emmanuel Medical Center in Omaha saved my life, and to them I'm grateful. But the real fear and the real nightmare started when I had to pay the bill. You see, I was uninsurable because I had pre-existing conditions due to family history. I had a catastrophic health care plan through my business. It had limited coverage. I was responsible for over 60% of my medical bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It bankrupted me. Nobody, and I mean nobody, in this state should have to go through that because of medical bills and a lack of proper health care. It was a nightmare. Bill collectors calling dozens of times a day, liens being threatened on my home and trying to take my car. And the guilt out of all of it, I knew I could not pay the hospital that saved my life. This has to be fixed, and it has to be fixed now. We cannot continue, and that is why I want to be your senator, because health care is my #1 priority. Take my staff. I have a fourth-generation cancer survivor on the staff. I have a mother who has a son that has type 1 diabetes. I have a 2-time cancer survivor on my staff. This is unacceptable. I am currently on the Affordable Health Care Act here in Nebraska, as millions of Americans are in this country and thousands in Nebraska. When I speak with Nebraska small business people, farmers and ranchers, a lot of them are on the Affordable Health Care Act. And those who are not on Obamacare pay $5,000 and $6,000 and $7,000 a month in health care premiums. I'm sure you all have stories just like mine. And we have to get to the bottom of this and get health care for the people. I don't have all the answers. I'm not a healthcare specialist, but I am a healthcare user specialist. We have plans in place that we're willing to work on, but we have to go with the rules of engagement. We have to concentrate on healthcare, not keep kicking it around. Senator Sasse, in 2014, promised healthcare for all Nebraskans and all Americans. He voted over and over to take healthcare away in the last 6 years, to take away protections for pre-existing conditions, to make smaller payments to Medicare for our seniors, to reduce coverage for people that are poor on Medicaid.
Mr. Janicek, thank you. Your time is up. Mr. Sasse.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for hosting us tonight. Waverly, Colleen, and Fred, thank you for serving as moderators and guides. And to NET, thank you for hosting this debate and for trying to bring an important debate and discussion about the policy and political issues facing our nation to the people in Nebraska. I have never been a politician before until I ran 5 years ago. I'm one of 8 people out of 100 in the U.S. Senate who'd never run for anything before running for the Senate, and I compliment my opponent, Mr. Janicek, for being a small business owner and creating jobs and serving his community and not having spent his life in politics as well. When my wife and I were deliberating and praying about running in 2013, 2014, and then ultimately deciding to do it, We went out on the campaign trail, lived off a campaign bus for the better part of 16 months. Our kids were 12, 10, and 2. We did hundreds and hundreds of events across Nebraska's 93 counties, and we would often quip as a broader part of the storytelling about why we were running that we wanted to displace some political weirdo from seeking the Nebraska Senate seat, because our politics are too often driven by people who act like if you're interested in politics, it should be your whole life, it should be the center of your identity, and you should try to find community in anti-politics, meaning trolling people on the other side of the political aisle is often a core part of the identity of a lot of people engaged in politics. That's not what the American tradition was supposed to be, and thankfully that's not what most Nebraskans believe in. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a churchman, I'm a Cornhusker football addict, I'm also an American, a Nebraskan, a conservative, and a whole bunch of other identities. Being a politician is a short-term calling, as I see it, and I want to be involved in politics to represent the kinds of Nebraskans who think the most important things in life are not about politics. Politics matters, and I'm excited that we're going to get to discuss a lot of the issues, the future of the technology race with China, the future of work and the implications for more job disruption. As Mr. Janicek talked about, healthcare shouldn't be the kind of issue that you lose when you change job or geography, your health insurance coverage. The future of work, the future of war, American civics, and whether or not we're passing along an understanding of the First Amendment to the next generation. None of those issues should be primarily an ideological spectrum from right to left. There should be a whole bunch of overarching civic and American and cultural and economic things that we believe in common before we get down to the policy fighting. Some of the policy fighting is important, and I'm glad we're going to get to hash through some of those issues tonight. But one of the reasons I decided to seek re-election is because the problems we talked about 5 years ago of a politically addicted, very small subset of Americans who want to act like Washington, D.C. should be the center of life. And this isn't just on the left. This is increasingly in my party as well. There's a very small set of people, kind of political weirdos, who want to displace normal Nebraskans from a healthy middle-level engagement with politics. And I'm glad we get to sort through a lot of these issues tonight. Thank you all for hosting, and thanks to those of you at home for tuning in.
Thank you, Mr. Sass. I'd like to start off by asking a question of both of you about your relationship with your respective political party. Mr. Sass, you've been critical of President Trump, a Republican president. The president endorsed you in a tweet late last year, and then last month in a tweet, the president said you've, quote, gone rogue again and called you a rhino, which stands for Republican in name only. Your past criticism of President Trump has drawn some criticism from within your own party. You once told Jake Tapper of CNN that you think about leaving the GOP, quote, every morning and think of yourself as, quote, an independent conservative who caucuses with the Republicans. So the question is, what do those statements say to Republican voters about how you would represent them and what's important to them?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Dennis. I'm glad we get a chance to talk about this today. I do have an interesting and complicated relationship with the President of the United States. I'll fully acknowledge it. And I think in my primary over the course of 11 months from last summer through to May, I got to hash that through with a lot of Nebraska's Republicans across 93 counties. I think Nebraskans actually get it. I get that CNN doesn't get it. Blue check marks on Twitter don't get it. But the way I approach politics and the way I approach my party, I think makes sense to the vast majority of regular people across Nebraska. And here's how I think about it. I've been a Republican and I've been a conservative for my entire life. I was fighting for conservative issues when Donald Trump was still bankrolling Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's campaigns long before he thought about joining the Republican Party to run. And so when I believe a certain set of issues, and I don't just believe them, I campaigned on them in 2013 and 14 and explained to Nebraska conservative voters what I believe. I hold those positions whether Donald Trump holds them or not. And so when President Trump decided to adopt conservative or Republican positions on a whole bunch of issues, I was excited to welcome him to the Republican Party and to the conservative movement. But on issues where he doesn't align with things that I believe or things that Republicans have traditionally believed or things that are good for Nebraska, I explained those differences as well. It seems to me that Washington, D.C., and particularly national cable political media news act like you're supposed to fall into one of two camps. You want to shine President Trump's shoes all day, every day, or you have to hate him and scream about him how he's the devil. I don't believe either of those things are true. I think there are issues where we agree, and when we do, I'm glad to fight for him. He's been unbelievably great at the kind of judges he's been nominating, and so I went on the Judiciary Committee to fight for his judges, and we've set an all-time record with the number of judges that have been confirmed in the last 3 years. But on another set of issues, when he talks about a so-called Mexican judge, or when he attacks free trade that Nebraska farmers and ranchers need, I explain to him, usually in private. He and I have a lot of healthy wrestling in private. I explain why I differ, and then on a subset of the issues that we fight about in private, I go public and I explain what I believe. And I think the vast majority of Nebraskans, and really the vast majority of Americans, understand that the distinction between having to shine somebody's shoes all day, every day, or think they're evil and scream that you think they're evil, that's a false choice. I don't believe that stuff. I don't think most Nebraskans do. So I explain where I differ, and I fight with him when we agree. And frankly, I think he appreciates the fact that we wrestle as much as we do. And I think Nebraskans understand it and are comfortable with it.
Thank you, Mr. Sass. Mr. Janasek, the Nebraska Democratic Party has said that they don't want you as their candidate. They don't support you, and they plan to back a write-in candidate instead. The state party asked you to quit the race after you sent sexually explicit text messages about a female staff member. So what do you say to Democrats in general and women voters in particular about what you admitted to doing and what it says about your ability to fairly represent all people?
Thank you. That's a good question. Glad you asked that question. I want to address the text message first. I made a mistake. It was wrong, and I apologized immediately. I also apologized in person. The Nebraska Democratic Party is not somebody who I work for. I do not work for the Nebraska Democratic Party chair. I am asking to go to work for the people of Nebraska. And that includes Republicans, that includes Democrats, and that includes independents. Now, my number one stance is health care. And that includes women and their health care, that includes children and their health care, and it includes everyone in Nebraska and in this country. Now, I have apologized for the text message, and my apology was accepted. In no way was that message sent with any type of intent, harm, or to do disservice to anyone, to maim a reputation. And it's time we move on. I have received lots of support from the Democrats and a lot of Republicans and a lot of independents in this race. You know, Senator Sass was talking about getting along with Trump and not getting along with Trump. Back to health care. President Trump has wanted a health care reform policy since he took office 4 years ago. And the Senate fails to work with him on this. Senator Sass has failed to work for the people of Nebraska on health care. Now, he's had the time to write books, but he has not had the time to write health care policy for Nebraskans. So we need to move on from that text message, and we need to start talking about policy. I am not going to let 5 minutes of my life ruin everything I've done for women's rights and women's and children's shelters previous to that happening. And we need to work as a country together. We need to show unity and come together and stop with the partisan politics. It's time to pass legislation that affects all Americans. And that is not being done in our Senate, and that is not being done in our House. I'm asking for your vote to go to Washington, D.C. and go to work for the people. Thank you.
Starting off with questions from our panel of journalists is Fred Knapp, a reporter and producer for NET News who covers the Nebraska legislature, government, and politics, among other topics. Fred, your question, and Mr. Janasek will respond first.
The United States has reportedly the highest number of cases and deaths from COVID-19 of any nation in the world. What do you think of the national response so far, and what specifically would you do to improve it?
Well, the national response so far was that we dropped the ball back in January, February, and March. You know, there was an intelligence meeting, which Mr. Sass is on that panel, back in January, which he failed to attend. And that was the first warning that this pandemic was coming to the United States, and we had better prepare ourselves. Let's fast forward to April of 2020, when Senator Sass voted against the relief aid bill because he said additional $600 a month for only 8 weeks was too generous for over 40 million people that had lost their jobs. You know, he held up the Senate floor for 6 or 7 hours arguing that case. The bill eventually passed without his vote. The pandemic has now taken 185,000 lives as of this week. We still have about 15 million people unemployed. We are facing an economic ruin right now with a lot of businesses, including mine. We lost all of our wedding business. We lost all of the graduation business. 22% of restaurants in this country have closed permanently. What we can do to help fix this immediately is to test and to test and to test. We have to do a federal mask mandate, I feel, for everyone to stop the spread of this disease. We have to make testing available in our schools and in our businesses so we can reopen. We've got sporting events shut down. We've got the school system shut down. We've got retail shut down. We've got restaurants shut down. Now, the president right now is working on a vaccine. And we've got the CDC involved, and they have got something on the horizon. And that is going to be another huge thing that prevents this virus from being transferred because we can stop it in its tracks. But there's no telling when that's going to be ready because we have got to do trials and make that work for everyone. So those are the issues I would address. There's nothing we can go back and do with all the things that we didn't do in the first place. We've got to start today and move forward. And this administration has a problem addressing that we actually have a problem. And we do have a problem. And if we want to have a safe America and an America that is not infected, we have to do what I suggested. Thank you.
Mr. Sass.
Thank you for the question, Fred. Yeah, the American response to COVID has been inadequate in a whole bunch of ways. Mr. Janicek said a bunch of things that were inaccurate about the legislation we passed, the COVID relief legislation, phase 3.0, a piece of legislation that I did support. There are many, many pieces inside it that were very foolish and poorly thought out and having some big and bad unintended consequences. But that piece of legislation, which I did support, actually includes a vaccine accelerator fund, which is one piece of what is working in the country right now. So there are 5 U.S. pharma companies that have COVID vaccine clinical trials going on. Sometimes you hear it reported that there are 3. That's because 3 of the U.S. companies are doing their trials in the U.S., but there's a 4th U.S. company in Europe and a 5th U.S. company in Asia. And we have the best pharmacological pharmaceutical vaccine development anywhere in the world happens in the United States. And normally, if you're a drug company and you think you might be 4th or 5th in the race to a vaccine, you might start backing off the accelerator because you're making more and more investment and you might not get the intellectual property benefits of it after the vaccine is developed. My colleague Steve Daines, Republican from Montana, took the lead and I rode sidecar with him fighting for this, that we decided to make sure that all the other 4 pharma companies will, after a vaccine is developed, so when one of the 5 companies wins the race, the other 4 companies will all be reimbursed for all their expenses plus 10%, which forces all 5 companies, and the U.S. innovation is the best in the world, to continue running through the tape, and that's probably why we're going to set an all-time record in the timeline to vaccine development. That said, the total number of deaths in the U.S. is too high, and our public deliberation and the public trust about how we got to where we are is yet again a consequence of American screaming tribal politics rather than constructive problem solving. Let's think about 2 things, the lockdowns and the mask discussion. I think a national mask mandate is a terrible idea, but the reality is lots more Americans should be wearing masks indoors, and we should be able to use the federal government. There should be public trust, and we should have a president who can go to the bully pulpit and explain to the American people why masks indoors are a good way to love your neighbor. You're not wearing a mask indoors to protect yourself. You're trying to protect your neighbors. I'm on and off a plane every week. I live here in Nebraska. I commute every week. Our home in Fremont is where we are on weekends if we're not out across the state doing field work. But Monday to Friday, I fly to D.C. And so if I'm on and off a plane every week, when I get back, I might be an asymptomatic carrier. A good way to love my neighbor is to make sure when I'm indoors, I'm wearing a mask. That said, you got lots of places all over the country where people are now trying to wear masks outdoors, 50 yards from anybody else as a show of symbolic politics. That's a bad idea. We should have had more persuasion about masks and less economic lockdown, which has caused lots of carnage, not only economically, but in terms of public health.
Thank you, Mr. Sass. Colleen Williams is the evening news anchor for NTV based out of Kearney. She's an experienced journalist covering news in central Nebraska and across the state for a number of years. Welcome, Colleen, and Mr. Sass will respond to your question first.
We're talking about the CARES Act, the emergency coronavirus aid, costing trillions of dollars. This week, NPR and the Wall Street Journal reported the U.S. federal debt, now at nearly $27 trillion, is projected to exceed the size of the entire U.S. economy in 2021, a milestone not reached since World War II. What should be done about the growing national debt? Do you favor increases in taxes or decreases in entitlements like cuts to Social Security or something else altogether?
Thank you, Colleen. Very important question, and we don't talk about it nearly enough. So to underscore two of the facts in your question, we are just this week setting the all-time record for the debt to GDP ratio. The overall U.S. debt is going to be bigger this year than the entire size of the U.S. economy. We haven't had a debt to GDP ratio of greater than 100% since the early 1940s when we were at war. We've never before done this when we're not at war. And here, both parties need to have big targets painted on their backs. When I was running, I really did believe Republicans were a lot more serious about our kids' and grandkids' fiscal future and that the Democrats were derelict in this issue. Since I've been in D.C. for 5.5 years, I've learned that both parties are dominated by politicians who care more about their own incumbency than telling the American people the hard truth. Here's the hard truth. Our problem is not that we don't tax enough. Our problem is not that we're spending too much on military and national defense. If you look at it as a share of GDP, we're much lower than we were in World War II or through the entire Cold War. Our problem is not wasteful discretionary spending, though there's lots of discretionary spending that is wasteful. But each of those issues, national security and discretionary domestic spending, are less than 15% of total federal spending, less than 15% each. More than 70% of federal spending is entitlements, made up of 5 categories: Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, Social Security, and interest on the debt. Our problem is not that we tax too little. Our problem is not that we spend too much to safeguard national and global security. Our problem is that our entitlement programs are completely unsustainable, and politicians have moved them off the books so we don't have to tell the American people the truth about them every year. We need to do a budget reform process, first of all, that does 2-year instead of annual budgeting so we don't get to a fiscal cliff and a potential stupid government shutdown every September 30th, where the only choices available are spend 0% of last year, that is shut down the whole government, or spend 102% of last year with no accountability, just letting everything drift as if all governmental programs are equally thoughtful and effective. What we need to do is admit that our entitlement spending is totally off the rails. When we set our retirement age at age 65 in the 1930s, life expectancy was 62. It was a program for unusually long-lived widows. Today, our shared life expectancy in this room is 81 years of age. My son, my youngest kid, is 9. He was born in Douglas County in the year 2011, and according to CDC tables, a male born in Douglas County in 2011 has a 50-50 statistical chance to see age 100. That is great news everywhere except a world devoid of political leadership. And that's where we live right now. There is zero chance my kid's retiring at 65 and playing 35 years of middle-class entitlement golf. We need to get honest with the American people about entitlements driving our spending problems and get away from rhetorical nonsense like Medicare for all when we need market reforms that lead to health delivery system reform.
Thank you. Mr. Janicek.
I agree with Mr. Sass on one thing, that we do need to reform the budget. Let's look at a business budget or a home budget. If we're spending more money than we're bringing in, we have to start to curtail our spending. Now, Mr. Sass listed 5 things. Medicare, that is funded by payroll deductions. And on your check, you see Social Security, Medicare, retirement. That money is paid in by the working class and the working people in this state and in this country. Medicaid is also part of that deduction that we pay. Social Security benefits are also part of that. It's a separate deduction on our paycheck that we pay into that system. We cannot defund Medicare and Social Security because those are lifeboats for people that retire and have medical needs as they get older. The Obamacare, or the Affordable Health Care Act, that should be fixed to where it works. We've had that in place since 2010, and I pay a premium every month for my health care coverage, or a tax. And that tax goes up or down based on my income. If we were to be able to expand that, we could get that program to help pay for itself. We could also bring down the price of pharmaceutical drugs. We could also bring down the price of hospitalization cost. These are all things that can be worked on to bring these entitlement costs down to where they're profitable or they don't drain the federal budget. In 2017, Mr. Sass voted on a tax cut for corporations, where over 83% of the benefit went to 1% of the population. And it caused a $1.7 trillion drop in tax revenue that keeps this country going. In June of this year, in the 1 month, we spent $864 billion in 1 month in federal spending. That exceeded what we normally spend in 3 months. You know, you had mentioned that the deficit, or the debt, was at $27 trillion. I was going to come tonight and talk about it being $24 trillion, but that must have been a couple months ago. We have got to get on top of spending. Now, as a small business owner, I know how to control cost. I know how to take a product and price it accordingly. I know how to manage people and payroll, and that is what the government has failed to do. And we can't keep passing it on to one party or the other party. The parties have to start working together to attack the deficit. We're on a highway to bankruptcy. Under Mr. Sass, Senator Sass, government shut down 4 times in the last 6 years. One of them being the longest government shutdown in 2017 or 2018, 17-18, December through January. That was on his dime. They cannot manage the money, and we need to get someone in there that can. Thank you.
The final journalist on our panel is Waverly Monroe. Waverly is a reporter and weekend morning anchor with KETV in Omaha. She's an Omaha native. Welcome, Waverly, and Mr. Janasek will respond to your question first.
Mr. Janasek, police departments receive millions of dollars in federal grant money. In light of recent incidents in Minneapolis, Kenosha, and now Rochester, what stipulations should Congress place on those funds to ensure police are held accountable for their actions?
Thank you for that question. That is so important as to what is going on in our country right now and in the cities you mentioned. You know, this boils down to Black Lives Matter. It boils down to police departments getting funded and doing the wrong thing. I am not anti-police. I am not for defunding the police. I think police officers should be paid more for what they do. And the government money helps these police stations and these police entities in our states and in our cities by training them, by hiring the best people, by doing diversity training. You know, we have a few bad police officers right now that are making everyone look bad. We need to work on getting the right people into the job. We need to make sure there's better qualifications for people that become police officers, and we need to throw more money, I believe, at the police departments in order to have better care. You know, Black people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. You know, they have anxiety when they walk black. They have anxiety when they drive black. They have anxiety when they shop black. Just waking up every morning being black is anxiety. You know, we see the police getting blamed for what's going on right now with the riots and the protests, and that's not fair. There are a few bad police officers that need to be addressed. The funding that goes to the police departments maybe should be allocated better, and that can be a government and a local interaction when they work on that together. But we have got to take accountability for the bad police officers that are causing a lot of this trouble right now. if you look at the big picture, what's going on right now with the military intervention and the police departments getting the blame for everything, it's always a white and black issue. You know, white people sometimes don't even get arrested, and black people get shot and murdered. And that is a huge problem that's going on in this country right now. And that is why I'm all for keeping the funding going so we can address these issues and make people feel safe in this country. We need some big and bold policy moves. And it boils down to making everything equal, equality. You know, I don't live in a black neighborhood, and I'm not black, but I understand what black people are going through. And it's time we address it, and it has to be fixed. And if more funding is what it takes, I'm all for it. Thank you.
Mr. Sass.
Waverly, thank you for your very important question. So first of all, let's just admit that this happens against a backdrop of way too many tragedies. So the case of George Floyd, the case of Breonna Taylor, the case of Eric Garner, there have been too many places where Americans are not living up to the American creed and what we believe. Your specific question is about what can the federal government do, and I believe that there are some things, but I think we also need to talk about things that are not about federal politics, policy, and dollars, but at what can be done. Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, is one of my closest friends in the Senate. And Tim led our police reform group. 6 Republican senators worked on this after the tragedy of the 8 minutes and 46 seconds in Minneapolis. And body cameras is one of the most fundamental things that needs to happen. Mr. Janicek is right about the training levels. I've done ride-alongs with Nebraska police overnight, and when you see the range of issues that they have to try to intercede on, I was on an overnight ride-along with the Lincoln Police Department maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. And the number of domestic violence cases that our men and women in blue have to tackle in the middle of the night and showing up in circumstances that are scary and confused. There's some really amazing police. Our police, the majority of them are heroes. And when their wives or their husbands send them out at night, if they're working second or third shift, they're scared about what they're going to encounter overnight. And those people need to be applauded and celebrated and thanked. And yet it is clearly true, and the police will tell you this, that they have too little training for the range of issues that they have to tackle. So I also believe, though I'm a very small government guy, I'm the third most conservative member of the U.S. Senate by voting record, there's not many places where I think we need more money. We do need more money on police training. Lots of that is a local issue, but the federal dollars should flow to help with that. And I'm proud of the work that Tim Scott and I and our broader police reform group tried to do. Unfortunately, it got caught up in a lot of the typical partisanship of Congress, and you have many people who'd rather have an issue than have a solution for the American people. But let's step up from politics and policy just for a minute and recognize that America is the most glorious nation in all of human history because it believes this anthropological truth as the starting point of who we are as a nation. We believe in limited government precisely because we believe in the limitless rights and God-given dignity of all 330 million Americans. And when you see something happen, like what happened in Minneapolis, or what happened to Breonna Taylor in Kentucky when she's in her own home, those issues of over-policing scream out in a brokenness in our system that violates our own creed. I know we're at time now, so I won't make Dennis shut me up, but there's a lot more I'd like to say about what we should be doing to live up to the American creed in the face of each of those tragedies.
We're going to try to get one more question in on domestic policy before we move to foreign policy, but because we're running short on time in this segment, we're going to say 60 seconds for the answer to this question. Fred Knapp will have it, and it will be to Senator Sass to begin with.
You've both described big problems in the healthcare system. You've talked about your aspirations for how to make it better, but I'd like to ask you each for a couple of specifics on what could be done to make affordable healthcare more available to more Americans.
60 seconds.
Absolutely. 60 seconds feels farcical on this one, but let me give the lightning round, so I'll violate the speed rule. I'll go fast. In the 1980s, we had a pension system that didn't work for a world with shorter duration jobs. People used to have a defined benefit that they had in their job, and then they would take with them into retirement. They had a defined benefit pension. That didn't work when people started changing jobs a lot more. I was born in the early 70s. In the 70s and the 80s, an average breadwinner served at a firm for 26 years on average. Today, the average duration of a job is 4 years. We switched from defined benefit to defined contribution. That's exactly the change we need to make in healthcare. People need to be able to have aggregable premiums that they can take with them across job and geographic change. So you can have a health insurance policy and you don't become uninsured just because you move from Omaha to Council Bluffs. God help you if that had to happen to you. But if you moved from Nebraska to Iowa, you shouldn't become uninsured. If you change firms, you shouldn't become uninsured. And right now, the government is way too heavy-handed in its regulation, which makes it impossible for people to buy the insurance policies that they want and want to keep.
Thank you. Mr. Janasek, 60 seconds.
Senator Sass just nailed it. He said the government is too involved in regulation on people being able to buy health care and use it across state lines. The Affordable Health Care Act was created to make health care affordable, and yet the Republicans and a lot of the Democrats failed to fix it and make it better. Now, we have 3 plans that my campaign and I have come up with. We can expand upon the Affordable Health Care Act and make that better and make more people, get more people on the plan and more people paying into the system to bring the costs down. Number 2 that's being tossed around is the Medicare for All policy. Now, that's a great idea for urban areas, but if you take that to rural areas, you're going to have hospitals shutting down overnight because of the amount of cash flow that's going to be delayed in getting to them to pay bills. Number 3 would be like a universal single payer health plan, which is a public option where everyone can pay into a system. Say, for instance, you made $40,000 a year and you had a 5% tax. That means you would pay $2,000 into a universal health care plan and you're covered across state lines in the entire country. You don't pay any more premiums.
Thank you, Mr. Janasek. We want to thank everybody for joining us for this live debate with the candidates for the U.S. Senate from Nebraska, Republican Ben Sass and Democrat Chris Janasek. I'm NET News Director Dennis Kellogg. We transition now to foreign policy, and Waverly Monroe of KTV has our first question, and Mr. Janasek will answer first.
Mr. Janasek, tensions with China grows as Washington alleges that companies like Huawei are threatening national security and using its products to spy on Americans. Plus, the Associated Press reports the U.S.-China trade deficit hit $63.6 million in July. That's almost 20% higher than June's deficit. What specific changes would you make to improve our relations with China?
Well, that's another great question, what's going on internationally with trade. We have to sit down with China and we have to negotiate and come to terms where it benefits both countries. We buy more from China than they buy from us because we are a nation of consumers. We are a nation of consumers and disposables, and China fits that bill. Right now, the Chinese government, which is a communist government, is working to undermine the United States, to undermine our intelligence, to infect our election process and to sway people's ideas. And that is all part of the intelligence agency's responsibility here in the American government. I agree with you that trade is unfair and it's something that has to be worked on. But one thing we don't want to do is put that burden on companies and farmers and ranchers here in Nebraska. I'm going to talk about Nebraska and the tariffs that are on their trade. You know, my grandfather was a farmer, and I grew up on the farm, and he would get up every morning at the crack of dawn and get in that field. And we would run lunch out to him because he wouldn't come home for lunch because he didn't want to lose any time. And then at dinner time, we'd all sit down and we'd talk about our day. He loved the land. He tilled that land. He planted that seed so he could have a crop to grow during the summer months, no matter what the weather was, no matter what machinery broke down. Those were all risks that were involved. But he wanted to have a harvest in the fall that he could sell and provide for his family. And we don't need government interrupting our trade policies with China and with other countries, especially in Nebraska in our agricultural community. We need them to work with China. We need them to work with the trade associations on an international level. Mr. Sass, one of his big things is the intellectual property that they come, and we have a department for that, and that department should remain funded and to be taken care of. China is a problem with American trade. I don't know everything about it, but I know I'm not going to do things the same way that the current administration is doing because it's not working for us. It's not benefiting our country, and especially people here in Nebraska in our agricultural industry. One thing we have to understand also is that agriculture makes up 25% of Nebraska's business. And if we don't have a market to sell, we're going to lose out on that. 1 out of every $4 that comes into the state comes through our agricultural communities and our farmers and our ranchers. So that it has to be addressed with China. Intellectual property has to be addressed with China. The trade deficit has to be addressed with China. And those are things that I will work on and learn more about when we get to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Mr. Sass.
Waverly, you ask a very important question because the Chinese Communist Party is issue 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the long-term national security threats that we face as a nation. If we look 10 years into the future, the world is going to be Chinese Communist Party led, or the world is going to still be American values led. And we lead in every major domain, but the rate of closure is all on the Communist Party's side right now. Lots of that is because of intellectual property theft, but a lot of it is because the U.S. is just not serious enough about the magnitude of changes coming in the future of warfare, and the Chinese Communist Party is deadly serious. When we look at the major domains of new technology in warfare, you mentioned 5G. In addition, I would add AI, machine learning, robotics, biotechnology, and quantum computing. When we look at the major domains of technology that are going to affect the future of war, China's growth rate is much faster than ours. We are not on a path to winning the long-term battle with the Chinese Communist Party. Again, I want to distinguish the two because our enemy is not the 1.4 billion Chinese people. It is the leadership of the only 90 million person Communist Party. Only 7% of the citizens of China are involved in the Communist Party that oppresses and holds down their own people. The Uyghurs right now are experiencing a genocide. There is forced abortion, there is forced removals, there is forced sterilization happening all across Xinjiang province right now. After World War II, the world said, we will never forget and never again. It is happening now in China, and the world is not nearly serious enough. Our allies across the Pacific understand that the future of the world, not just in the Pacific, but the global security space, is going to be U.S.-led or it is going to be Communist Party of China-led. They all would prefer the U.S. to lead, but they doubt us right now. And what we should be fighting for is free trade, open navigation of the seaways, human rights, transparent contracts, the rule of law. The things that America should stand for on the global stage should not be doubted. If you are in Hong Kong today, you have lots of regret about having trusted the American people and the American government. If you're in Taiwan right now, you are scared. And the truth of the matter is, the U.S. needs to lead into the future. We need our allies to believe that we understand the value of our word and the importance of a robust foreign policy that makes commitments and keeps our commitments to our allies. Because we are for freedom. We are for contracts. We are for trade. We are for human rights. And the Chinese Communist Party is for surveillance states. They are against freedom in their trading relationships. They are against human dignity. They are for forced sterilization and genocide in Xinjiang. And we need the United States to come together and understand the stakes. And right now, Washington, D.C. isn't nearly serious enough about the magnitude of the problem we face with the Chinese Communist Party.
Thank you, Mr. Sass. Our next question comes from Colleen Williams of NTV, and it will be directed to Mr. Sass. And in order to stay on track here, we're going to go to 2-minute answers for this question.
Agriculture is a global enterprise for Nebraska farmers and ranchers, and our ag producers face extreme global pressures. We have new trade deals in place with some of our major foreign partners, in addition to economic concerns. Climate change is expected to impact agriculture worldwide in ways such as more frequent and violent weather extremes. As a U.S. Senator, what are your recommendations to help farmers deal with these and other challenges and put them on the best path toward success?
So we are blessed to live in the breadbasket of the world. Nebraska's 93 counties are filled with farmers and ranchers who are literally the most productive farmers and ranchers in all of human history. I'm a historian by training, and usually there's a lot more continuity than discontinuity in the world. So if you use words like unique or exceptional or extraordinary or unprecedented, usually you're wrong. In this case, it's true about Nebraskans. Nebraska is the most productive farm and ranch land in the world, and this is the most productive farm and ranch moment in all of human history. What does that mean? It means we grow so much more food than we could ever conceivably consume here. We need export markets. And so tying your question back to Waverly's and what do we do with China? The truth of the matter is that China is one of the very few places where we have to admit that totally free trade has never been free because of the way China cheats. And so we need to be growing every other free trade deal we possibly can in the world, because we need to create a counterbalance against what the Chinese Communist Party is trying to build. We should seek as much ag and industrial commodity-based trade with China as we can, but we need to partially decouple our digital economy from China's. If we're going to do that, we're going to continue to experience bumps with China. So what we should be leading is something like a revamped and more robust Trans-Pacific partnership that has the United States convening allies like South Korea, Japan, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, and we should be pulling in people like the United Kingdom as they do their Brexit. Potentially Israel as well. But we ought to start with the core countries that were the old TPP, and we ought to add to it technology standards. NATO is the most successful military alliance in the history of the world, and NATO and American will ultimately won the Cold War. The Cold War that we face with the Chinese Communist Party over the next decade and beyond is every bit and more acute and dangerous, and we need to lead an alliance that looks like NATO plus for the Pacific.
And Mr. Janicek.
Thanks for that question, Colleen. It goes back to what I was just talking about our farm economy and the importance of it is to Nebraskans and Nebraska farmers and ranchers. Senator Sass was talking about China again, and it is a very important market, but it's hard to compete in that market when your own government is shutting down that market and putting tariffs on food rather than negotiating better prices and better trade programs for the food and the commodities that we need to trade. You know, the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, the previously NAFTA, was just signed off on in July of 2020. And that opened the markets for free trade again through Mexico and the United States and in Canada. We upped our dairy interest in Canada because of the USMC trade agreement, the former NAFTA. That's a start. But we have to keep in mind that our farmers are suffering and our ranchers are suffering due to these trade and tariff disagreements that we have with China and other countries. And just to bring it home real quick, we have the big four producers in this country: Tyson Foods, Smithfield Foods, JBS, and I believe the other one is Cargill. And they are manipulating prices, and they are causing a monopoly amongst the big four. We used to have 12 producers and there were 8 producers. We went to 6 producers. And I've learned this by talking to ranchers and to farmers in western Nebraska who do all the work, raise the cattle, keep them on their feedlots, feed them, and then when it comes time to go to market, they don't get any good price for their beef. It costs them more to raise the cattle than they can sell it for. And then the big four manipulate the markets, and you've all seen it in the grocery stores. The price of meat has skyrocketed and going up, and they keep all the profits. And that has got to come to a stop. You know, most of our agricultural commodities here are having a hard time just supplying enough beef and food for our country, let alone for foreign countries. But the government can't keep writing checks when they ruin the trade negotiations we have with foreign markets.
Thank you, Mr. Janicek. Up next, Fred Knapp of NET News, and Mr. Janicek will answer the question first. Again, 2 minutes response.
Okay.
The United States currently has troops deployed in countries ranging from Syria to Niger based on the authorization for the use of military force that was enacted following the 9/11 attacks from al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Has Congress fulfilled its responsibility in approving these deployments? And if not, what will you do to ensure that it does?
Well, that's a good question. And Mr. Sass probably knows more about this than I do. But here's what I do know. We have to keep our country protected. And if these countries that you mentioned are a threat, then I am all for keeping our troops there and making sure that they are taken care of. I'm not for troops on the ground and putting young lives of people that are in the military from our country in danger. In this modern age of technology and drones, we can monitor conditions like that. But again, it comes to sitting down with these countries and talking about peace. I know a lot of them don't have the United States' best interest at hand, and that is why we have a military. And that is why our military is funded so well. And that is one of the reasons government exists, to protect the people of this country. Now, I have never served in the military, but I have people in my family that have, and this is of utmost importance to them. I have a lot of friends and business partners that were former military that came and started their own businesses, and it was a concern of them that they did not have the support of government when they were overseas. And that would be one of my number one priorities, to make sure that the people we send overseas, our service members and our military people, are protected and taken care of. Congress and the Senate and the President work together, and I think we have great protections right now, except for the fact that the current administration wants to pull soldiers out of Germany. And this has set a fire alarm all over Europe, because we need that security there to protect our European allies and our NATO allies in order to protect our American citizens. Government's role is to protect this country with our military, and it receives the most funding out of any of the programs available to the country to keep it protected. So I'm all for government and involved in the military, and I think Congress is doing a good job with keeping them there for our protection.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Sass.
Thanks for the question, Fred. And first of all, I'd like to just begin by acknowledging another point of commonality with Mr. Janicek. He's completely right that removing troops from Germany from NATO forward deployment is a very bad idea, and I hope that the administration continues to be forced to reconsider that bad idea. Fred, your specific question was about the authorization for use of military force in 2001 and 3. One of the only things that Congress consistently does well is the National Defense Authorization Act is passed every year. I think we're on year 57 or 58 consistently, where every year we re-update the funding priorities and the human capital development and weapons systems priorities for the Pentagon and the broader defense agencies. And we should be updating the authorization for use of military force with that as well. So first of all, to your core question, has the Congress adequately done its job in this space? The answer is no. But it is also the case that we need to explain to the American people why things like pulling troops out of NATO and Germany is a bad idea. One of the most important and most rewarding pieces of my job is that I show up at troop deployment and troop return ceremonies across Nebraska to thank the troops, and frankly, as importantly as the troops, their families, their husbands, wives, their kids, their parents, people who are at these ceremonies sending their families off for 11 months, for 15 months, for however long the deployment is. And these folks understand that what they're doing is important, that what they're doing secures the world, not because we do it just out of the goodness of our heart, though good allies do make good friends and good neighbors ultimately make the world a safer place. But we learned as an American people after 9/11 that it is much easier to destroy groups like Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan before they get to the World Trade Center than trying to respond to it afterwards. And so right now there are many men and women tonight whose heads will be hitting a pillow somewhere abroad rather than be returning home with their family for Labor Day.
Thank you, but we are going to move now into closing statements, and we begin those with Mr. Sass.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, first of all, to the viewers across Nebraska's 93 counties. It has been a great honor and privilege the last 5.5 years to be able to represent you in Washington and, frankly, to work alongside you. I mentioned that many times politics seems like it's dominated by the 5% or the 10% of folks who want to scream most about politics. One of the great rewards of my job is when I get to work next to Nebraskans, loving their neighbor, putting bread on the table, and fulfilling a calling in one of Nebraska's 93 counties. Yesterday, I got to ride the back end of a garbage truck in Columbus. One of my favorite things to do, frankly, is work a trash route at 6:30 or 7 in the morning. Nobody's ever mad at you when you show up to haul off their trash. And when you're with a Nebraskan out in the field and you hear them talk, they don't think politics is the center of the world. They think that Washington, D.C. should do a small number of the most important things and then get the heck out of the way. Again, politics matters, but it's like 5th or 8th on anybody's list of what's important. Their family and their neighborhood and their small business and their church, those are the central institutions and issues in their lives, and they want Washington to do a smaller number of more important and more urgent things. And it has been my great privilege over these last 5.5 years to be able to represent Nebraskans who have a commonsensical approach to government mattering, but not being the most important. Call it a one cheer for politics approach to government. We need more politics of gratitude in this country and less politics of grievance. Both of these two parties are consumed by people, a small number of people, but they're the loudest screaming voices that want to tell everybody America's broken and our best days are behind us and it's not fixable. Nebraskans don't believe that. They don't think Washington's the center of the world, but they think America's best days are in front of us. They believe that for themselves, and more importantly, they want to believe that for their kids. And I'm honored and grateful to have been able to represent Nebraska the last 5.5 years. And if it is your choice to the people of Nebraska, I would be honored if you would choose to vote for me on November 3rd. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Sass. Now a closing statement from Mr. Janasek.
Thank you. And thanks to the panel for all the great questions and everything. And thank you, NET Television, for this. As I started off in my opening statement, we were talking about the importance of health care. And I just want everyone to know that you heard my story, and it's the same story you probably have, the same story you've heard from friends and family members. Health care reform must be addressed, and it must be addressed now. Mr. Sass, in the last 6 years, has voted over and over to take health care away from people. Mr. Sass voted over and over to take away pre-existing condition protections for people. Mr. Sass voted to reduce Medicare for our seniors. Mr. Sass voted to reduce Medicaid for the poor. Mr. Sass found all the time in the world to write books, but he did not make the time to write health care policy that affects all Nebraskans. Nebraska deserves a senator who cares. My name is Chris Janasek, and I do care, and I am listening. And I want everyone to know that this election that's coming up, this is not about Republican ideas and moving things further right. And this is not about Democratic ideas and moving things further left. This is about ideas for the people to move our state and this country forward. Now look, I'm a small business owner. I'm a baker. I learned that from my grandmothers on both sides of my family, and I turned that into a business. And my civic duty now, because of my own healthcare problems, have led me to run for the United States Senate. This is so important to me. What we have here is a complete lack of representation in government. Senator Sass has said over and over and over tonight that government should have done this and could have done that. Well, sir, you are in charge with your other 99 senators, and you have failed the American people. And I don't think the American people should vote to put the same people back in office. Another thing Mr. Sass ran on was term limits. I'm not a career politician. I will do my 6 terms, and I will find a fix for health care. And I will make that happen, and I will go back to my happy business, where I get to celebrate in weddings with my cakes and my baked goods and graduations and birthday parties. This is not a career thing. This is not what the forefathers, the founding fathers, intended. They intended for people not to make a career out of politics, but to get in, do something for the people, and then get out. And I guarantee you, that is what I will promise you and commit to you right now. My name is Chris Janasek, and I'm asking you to take a chance on me and to vote for me in this upcoming election in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janasek. And that brings us to the conclusion of tonight's NET News Nebraska U.S. Senate debate. Thanks to Mr. Sass and thanks to Mr. Janasek. Also, thank you to our panel of journalists from across the state of Nebraska, and thank you as well. You can watch tonight's debate and also find comprehensive coverage of the upcoming election at netnebraska.org/campaignconnection2020 and find election resources and stories from voters across the country from our election coverage partner, American Amplified, at americaamplified.org. The election is about 8 weeks away. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday, November 3rd, or request your mail-in ballot before the deadline of October 27th. For all of us here at NET News, I'm Dennis Kellogg. Thanks for watching.